Hey, everyone. So I want to talk about something that just happened twice in the last 2 weeks, and almost nobody in the media is talking about it, or at least they're not connecting the dots. These are certainly headlines, but they're not connecting the dots, and something big is happening. Both Colombia and Peru had elections. Take a look at these headlines here. These are the people who won. Trump endorsed De La Espriella, declared winner of Colombia's presidential runoff election. And we also had in Peru, Keiko Fujimori secures victory in Peru's presidential election. So why is this important? Why am I making a video about the elections in Colombia and Peru? Well, in both of them, the candidate who won is openly and explicitly pro-Israel. In Colombia, as I said, Abelardo de la Espriella won the runoff on June 21st, and within hours of taking the congratulatory call from Israel's foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, Espriella said that Colombia would, quote, restore and strengthen its relationship with the state of Israel like never before, that Israel can count on Colombia as a loyal friend and a steadfast ally. Now, this guy is replacing Gustavo Petro. Petro didn't just criticize Israel, he severed diplomatic ties with the Jewish state entirely. This is a complete reversal. And a week before that, Peru elected Keiko Fujimori, and her camp has been signaling that she wants to deepen security and intelligence cooperation with Israel. She wants to model her approach to crime and terror on what Israel does. She's saying that openly. Now, here's the thing. If it were just Colombia and Peru, we could say maybe it's okay, it's two countries, it's a bit of a coincidence, but it's not. And that's why I made this video, because what we're seeing in these two countries with a pro-Israel right-wing candidate being elected is now the dominant trend across that entire continent. Let's go down the list. I want you to notice something as I go. Now, notice how recent almost all of this is. In Argentina, that's the most famous one. That's Javier Milei. He's the most outspoken of all of them. He stood at the Western Wall in Jerusalem and said that his support for Israel, quote, comes from the heart. He called it a just cause, the cause of the West. In April, he signed what's being called the Isaac Accords with Prime Minister Netanyahu and pledged to move Argentina's embassy to Jerusalem. Milei took office at the end of 2023. And then let's go to Ecuador. Daniel Noboa was reelected this past February. He stood in Jerusalem and told Netanyahu directly, we share the same enemies. You will always have my support. Ecuador has formally designated Hamas, Hezbollah, and the IRGC as terrorist organizations. In Panama, Jose Raul Mulino, he's also a pro-Israel candidate and head of state, and he's only been in office since the middle of 2024. All very recent. He always, he votes on Israel's behalf in the UN. In Bolivia, Rodrigo Paz Pereira, elected just last October, he pulled Bolivia out of the Hague Group and ended a long diplomatic freeze with Israel. Now, if you don't know what the Hague Group is, you should. It's a coalition of mostly global South countries founded in January 2025, about a year and a half ago, that coordinates legal and diplomatic action against Israel. That's the whole point of it. Arms embargoes, port bans, pushing the International Criminal Court arrest warrants against Netanyahu, all that stuff. That's the Hague Group. They push that stuff. Bolivia was one of the 9 founding members of the Hague Group. And then, when Paz Pereira came in, he's like, no. He pulled Bolivia out. This isn't just Bolivia warming up to Israel. This is a founding member of the anti-Israel legal coalition saying we're out under the new guy. And then in Honduras, we have Tito Asfura, who was just elected in November of this past year. And he ended a 16-year freeze in diplomatic relations with Israel. And Honduras, like Bolivia, was a founding member of the Hague Group and left in March. And then in Chile, Jose Antonio Cast was just elected in December. And this one's personal for him. He spent his campaign hammering his predecessor, Boric, for excluding Israel from an air show, and he called it anti-Semitic and ideological. Cast has already told President Herzog of Israel that he's returning Chile's ambassador after he had been recalled by the previous guy. And in Costa Rica, we have Laura Fernandez Delgado, who took office just in February. and has just signed a free trade deal with Israel. And of course, Peru and Colombia that we just mentioned in the last couple of weeks. Add to that the ones who've been pro-Israel for a while and have never wavered. Bukele in El Salvador, who after October 7th said plainly that anyone who supports Hamas is like someone, it's like a Salvadoran siding with MS-13, and he condemned them. He's pro-Israel. And in Paraguay and Guatemala, who both already have their embassies in Jerusalem, that's what, 11 or 12 heads of state, almost all of them elected just in the last 2.5 years. So this is a wave in South and Central America. So why is this happening? Why right now? Why specifically in this part of the world? Because this is unavoidable. This wave. These were all countries that were governed by the left before. So here's my read on it. Let's go back to Europe for a second. You have Viktor Orban, who governed Hungary for a while, just was ousted. But the Orban supporters in Hungary, Vox in Spain, that's the conservative Christian right-wing party, the Nationalist Party, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, the Le Pen supporters in France. I've said this before on this channel. All over the world, the populist, nationalist, Christian conservative right is pro-Israel. And that breaks an old paradigm that a lot of Jews, a lot of pro-Israel people are a little slow to understand, but it breaks an important paradigm. That's why they're slow to understand it. The assumption used to be that the hard right was where anti-Semitism lived, and the left was where Jews were safe. And that paradigm is dead. And it's been replaced by something which is, it's much more honest, in my opinion. It's much more real. Let me explain. You see, what's happening in Latin America is there's an instinct at work here. In Latin America, the alternative to the nationalist conservative right isn't a moderate center-left party. It's not like the Democratic Party in the United States. It's usually an actual Marxist or socialist movement, like Petro, Boric before Cast beat him in Chile, Lula in Brazil right now is a Marxist. And these conservative nationalist, often devoutly Christian voters and leaders have figured something out that a lot of Western commentators and Western politicians and Western electorate in like the US and elsewhere don't quite get, or they don't say it out loud if they get it, that there is an alliance, the Red-Green Alliance, the alliance between the Marxists and the Islamists. We know about that alliance. They are anti-biblical civilization. The idea of a morally free individual answerable to God rather than to the party or the state or the caliphate. Right? That is what they're opposed to, the Marxists and the Islamists. When these leaders that I've talked about here in South and Central America, like Wilders and Orban and Vox and others in Europe, when they look at the Middle East, the choice is not abstract or vague, right? They're not thinking about Israel as some far-off policy question. They're looking at their own backyard, their own narco-terror networks, which are often this combination of, like Hezbollah's involved in them. They know who's involved in them, the human trafficking networks. They look at the radical movements that talk the language of liberation while aligning with Hamas and the Islamic Republic. They recognize the pattern immediately. They see their socialist, Marxist heads of state when they're in power and political figures openly aligning themselves with Iran, openly aligning themselves with Hamas. So to these Christian conservatives in these countries, standing with Israel is a no-brainer. It's standing against the same civilizational enemy that they're fighting at home. Now, I want to make a point here about Brazil, because Brazil proves that this isn't even about who's holding office. It's about where the energy is. You see, Lula is in power right now. That election was probably stolen from Bolsonaro. That's a whole other story. There was a lot of shenanigans in the vote counting of that election. But nevertheless, Lula is very hostile to Israel. But the Bolsonaro movement, and right now that means not Jair Bolsonaro, who was president, but his son, Flavio Bolsonaro is currently running. And they have elections in October, and he is very pro-Israel, and he's polling competitively. And the Bolsonaro base in Brazil is exactly this same coalition. They're nationalists, they're conservative, they're deeply Christian, and they're instinctively pro-Israel and just as instinctively anti-Marxist. Let me show you something amazing about the Bolsonaro coalition here. This is a video clip. This is from a few years ago. This is from late 2023. This is an anti-Lula, pro-Bolsonaro protest. The protest had nothing to do with Israel. Okay, this is an anti-socialism, pro-Bolsonaro mass demonstration. But I want to show you something amazing. Look at this screen. Look at these crowd shots. That's an Israeli flag. That's an Israeli flag. See these Israeli flags here? 1, 2, 3. And then there's another one right here. There's another Israeli flag. They're all over the place. And this isn't the only clip you could find. You could find many clips of many different pro-Bolsonaro rallies from all over the world. And I'm sorry, not from all over the world, from all over Brazil. I mean, you'll find clips from all over the place, from different time periods. But at pro-Bolsonaro rallies in Brazil, people bring Israeli flags. Why do they bring Israeli flags? If it's anti-socialism, pro-Bolsonaro, they're in Brazil. Why do they bring Israeli flags? Because Israel represents their values. To them, the same way they see it as the opposite of the Hamas flag, the Palestinian flag that gets brought to every left-wing protest. So they say, hey, look, this is what we stand for. It's amazing. Amazing stuff going on there. So Bolsonaro is not currently in the presidential palace, but it's the largest opposition movement in the largest country in Latin America. And if this wave keeps building the way it has for the last 2.5 years, Brazil is going to follow these other Latin American countries and elect another pro-Israel leader. So here's what I want you to take from all this. This isn't 12 unconnected elections. It's one story repeating itself country after country after country. When voters are forced to choose between a Marxist-aligned left that makes excuses for Islamic terror or openly supports it, and a nationalist right that says the threat is real and Israel is on the right side of it and Israel is fighting our enemies, more and more of them all over this hemisphere are choosing Israel. That's the headline under the headline. So let's watch Brazil in October. We'll be covering that as it approaches. I think you're going to see the same thing happen there. Thanks for watching. And please make sure to head over to Israel 365 News as well. You got to check out all the content we're putting out there. Very important. But I think this is a very exciting development in the pro-Israel community. We're always bemoaning how the world doesn't like us. Watch what's happening in South America, folks. Very, very exciting developments going on there. All right. We'll leave it there. God bless.